I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're meeting on the traditional country of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and by recognising their cultural heritage and continuing connection to land, waters and community. I pay my respect to Wurundjeri elders, past, present and emerging, and I'd like to extend that to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people here with us today. And also I'd just like to thank RMIT for their very generous offer of this space. DVRCV is in partnership with RMIT on a few things at the moment, and it's really exciting for us to be able to use their spaces, especially in this exciting new building.
Starting from my left to right, we've got Pauline Rice. And Pauline is the principal at Fitzroy High School and has been for the past 9 years, having started at the school when it first began or opened in 2004. Prior to working at Fitzroy High School, Pauline was a middle years consultant working with schools in Victoria's northern metropolitan region of the Department of Education and Training. And in this role, she supported schools to employ current educational research to create highly effective school communities and environments. Pauline has also worked in a range of other schools in Melbourne, has taught across all year levels, and it has held a number of leadership positions. Welcome, Pauline.
Good morning.
Ash Pike is the project lead for the Department of Education and Training's Respect for Relationships initiative, and doing this work in the Barwon area. Ash has worked previously in the student engagement and wellbeing team at Northern Bay College, and has over 10 years' experience in the community sector, specialising in youth homelessness, youth mental health, LGBTIQ young people, and people living with HIV. Ash always has an overall focus on creating safe and inclusive schools, supporting clubs, sporting clubs, health services and communities free from violence and discrimination. Welcome, Ash. Therese is a teacher and social worker who has been working in the education and community sectors for 27 years. Currently, Therese works as the Student Wellbeing Coordinator at Warringah Park School, which is a specialist school in Hoppers Crossing. Therese always seeks to form strategic and meaningful partnerships, and as we'll see as we go through, one of those partnerships that we'll sort of be showcasing today is with Georgia, our next panellist, and Therese and their organisations. Having secured a posse as a lead school in the Department of Education and Training's Respect for Relationships initiative, Therese is now working hard and in close partnership with Georgia Wright, who I'm about to introduce, and Georgia's colleagues at Co-Health to implement the whole school approach at Warringah Park School. Welcome, Therese. And last but not least, Georgia Wright is the Health Promotion Officer at Co-Health, which is a not-for-profit community health organisation. Georgia's working in partnership, as I alluded, with Warringah Park School to support Therese and her colleagues to implement the whole school approach to respect for relationships. This partnership is a particularly good fit because Georgia actually brings with her experience as the coordinator of a peer-led sexuality and respect for relationships program for adults with intellectual disabilities. And this is a role that Georgia currently fulfills. Georgia represents Co-Health on the Implementation Committee of Preventing Violence Together, a regional partnership and strategy that guides the primary prevention of men's violence against women across Melbourne. Prior to joining Co-Health, Georgia worked in international development with women's rights organisations in the Asia-Pacific region. Welcome, Georgia. So we're just going to get straight into it with an initial question that I'd just like each of you to address. And I'm just curious to know if you can let us tell us a little bit about your Respect for Relationships work, or a snapshot of the Respect for Relationships work you're doing currently, or sort of in the last 6 to 12 months. Georgia, do you want to kick us off?
So I'm very lucky to have Therese at my side, so I said I'm just going to handball every question to her. And I'll start and then you can elaborate. So Co-Health has been working with Warringah Park for about 2 years now. And actually we started working with them on a another program called Girls Talk, Guys Talk, which is a sexuality and respectful relationships whole school approach that was developed by Women's Health West about a decade ago. And in 2013, Women's Health West and Co-Health looked at adapting that approach and that model to working in specialist school contexts. So we started working on that program and kind of did a bit of the formative work with the school around a needs assessment and professional development for teachers. And then the Respectful opportunity came up to join the Respectful Relationships Initiative, and Co-Health supported Warringah to successfully apply to be a lead school. So for the past 6 months, we are kind of working with them to figure out what that now looks like in the transition. And we were supporting one campus, whereas now they're going to be doing this across all of their campuses, which is fantastic. And yeah, sort of, I guess just more recently been having more concrete discussions about, where does our role now lie? So, yeah.
It was probably Co-Health and the work that we were doing with Co-Health that actually supported that, the idea to actually put in the lead for the lead school. So it was Anna who first worked with us, and she actually said to me, what do you think, why don't you put in as a lead school? So working in a specialist area, I was very passionate about bringing the voice of those students to this initiative, especially given some of the statistics around young people and children with special needs. So I think I wrote the lead school application in a day, and it was Anna that was emailing me back, add this, add that, put in the statistics. So I was very grateful for her, because people that work in schools know that they're very busy places. So to actually have the time to write those applications isn't always easy. So it was really about building on the partnership that we did have with Co-Health, and as Emma explained, my background is community. So I have worked with initially refuge referrals a long time ago. So when there was an opportunity to do some early intervention and preventative work in a school system with the help of community, I was really looking forward to that opportunity. So in terms of working with Co-Health, and what's important in terms of being in a school setting is that this initiative is very much about whole of community. So to have that community perspective is really important, especially when you're sitting in a group of teachers, leaders at a school. It's just excellent to have that broader perspective, and Co-Health has certainly been able to bring that to us. And I think the other thing that they do really well is their work around needs analysis and how they can take, I think we gave them, I'm not sure how many student surveys, and so this was both from our verbal and non-verbal students. And so there were probably, 50 to 100 surveys, and Georgia said, I'll take those away. I'll collate that data for you. And what they've been able to bring back just in terms of that collation of data, putting that into a video format that's being able to present to students and to parents has been really valuable. So we as a school certainly don't want to lose Co-Health. And also, as our assistant principal said, is to be a critical friend also, to tell us both the positives that we're doing, but also where there may be challenges, just bringing that sort of outside objective sort of perspective too is really important.
Thanks, Therese. Yes, we'll be digging down into some examples of how your partnership formed and the work that you've been doing together. So it's a great little intro. Thank you. What about you, Ash?
Hi, everyone. So in regards to my respectful relationships work, the last few years I've been at, as Emma mentioned, at Northern Bay College in engagement and wellbeing roles. And while I was there, I'm a teacher and also career and health promotion. So when I was there, I was teaching health. I was actually using the Fight Back series from Fitzroy High as well, and the building respectful relationships teaching and learning materials that were piloted. We weren't part of the official pilot, but we were using it at Northern Bay. And I then had the opportunity, I was keeping a close eye on the Royal Commission and the recommendations, and then applied for the project lead for respectful relationships in the Barwon area, which I was lucky enough to get. And so then since January, I've taken leave from my role at Northern Bay to be supporting schools in our area. So we have 11 lead schools and 45 partner schools in 5 local government areas, including 9 Catholic and independent schools. So I've been busy supporting other schools and building capacity around the whole school approach. It's been fantastic.
Great.
Good morning. I was just thinking about how we got into be in respectful relationships, and I think really we began when the school first opened in 2004, because our vision at the time is we wanted to create a humane learning environment, and we thought, well, what does that actually mean in a contemporary sense? So we looked at all the research, and we actually built some structural elements to the school that was specifically focused on building positive relationships with students. And we're going to talk about the advisory program later if people are interested in that and how we do that. But that became a structural element to the school that was really important in having a significant adult in a school that a student would trust implicitly to support them academically, emotionally, socially, and in any other way that they wanted, and to form that relationship with their families. Also, structure is part of our curriculum in honouring student voice in what they do and how they do it. There's an element that we call Excel, where if students are really interested in getting a subject that they want to study into the curriculum, they can do that. And one of those that came up about 4 or 5 years ago now is the Feminist Collective, where they wanted to look at gender-based violence and all those sorts of issues. So it became part of the curriculum. So when the Respectful Relationship initiative came along, it was kind of a natural progression to us, because we were already looking at the Feminist Collective was one element of the curriculum, but it wasn't delivered to all students. So how could we manage that? And the students did write a curriculum resource, and it's lovely to hear that people are using it, because that was, you know, a major effort by students and their teacher. But Respectful Relationships actually gave us another opportunity and support from the Education Department to be able to implement it in a much more, I'll use the word systematic, but it's not systematic, but in a way that is a whole school approach. So that's a bit of our story.
Fantastic. And I've actually had the fortune of working with Fitzroy High School and a number of other schools across Victoria in a visiting capacity. And I have to say that vision that you set out within 2004, in terms of a safe, supportive school environment, I absolutely feel that every single time I walk into that school. It's quite remarkable. So well done to you and your team. Therese and Georgia, you we've already said that you've established a partnership together on respectful relationships to bring that to life at Warringah Park Special School. I know that there are a lot of people in the room today who are keen to form a partnership, working in the community sector to form a partnership with a school in their area on respectful relationships. So I'm just wondering, from a practical perspective, if you could give us to sort of step us through basically how the idea came about. I know, Georgia, you said that it was Therese, the idea came from CoHealth, but what steps, like what practical steps were actually taken to form the partnership, and where are you at in the partnership, and how do you sort of, where's it going to take you, do you imagine?
Okay, so I suppose in terms of my role, I'm always seeking opportunities to work with community. And I think it was probably 2 years ago there was some expression of interest put out for Girls Talk, Guys Talk. And at that time we had some people from CoHealth come and talk to our wellbeing team. And we talked about the needs of our students, and often for our students, they, you know, to access sort of mainstream services can be challenging. So I think it was through those discussions that CoHealth said, let us know that yes, they were prepared to work with us. So I think what was really important at that time was we have a number of campuses at our school. We have 500 students. So rather than sort of choose our main campus, we chose a smaller campus in terms of sort of starting the work that we wanted to do. So it was really important at that time to have the campus leader and also a number of teachers involved in those meetings, and really through sort of those meetings and discussions with CoHealth, it's about sort of having a shared vision, if that makes sense. So it's really about like wanting the best outcomes for young people and families. And CoHealth, went on the journey with us. And I'm sure sometimes, like when there's meetings scheduled at lunchtimes and, the teachers that are meant to be there are coming and going, and like there's incidents with students. But somehow, we've just sort of continued working with each other. It was really important to involve them in when we were successful as the lead school, to involve them in our planning days with our whole leadership team. So we really see them as an equal in terms of the work that we're doing, would be included in our community of practice. And I think too what Georgia and Anna brought was that whenever you had an email or a question, and just up until recently with Georgia, another girl that was doing some work around the 16 days of activism, is, they're a resource. Like, rather than us searching, they will like email and say, are you aware of this? Do you want to include this in the work that you're doing with your students? So, it's just been a really, really positive partnership. And we did meet with Georgia and the other week, and we said we certainly don't want to let go of that partnership, because community agencies have an access to a whole lot of information that schools can benefit from, and they do bring the bigger picture as well. And I think like you alluded to, like, I'm always very mindful of where the funding for this initiative has come. So for me personally, I don't want to lose sight of that either.
Thank you. Do you want to add anything to that, Georgia?
I think you explained it really well, and I think the shared vision, I guess, is I just wanted to reinforce that point, and I guess within that kind of those clear roles and responsibilities, and I think having the whole leadership team in on that discussion is really important. Like, we had the document, like you have the memorandum of understanding, but I think the conversations is really important to give life and to give shared understanding to that. I guess, just in terms of where we're going, I think, what we've talked about and Therese said is, at the moment it's really, I guess, just still being present in this process as they kind of take this, quite large new initiative on board. And primarily that's through their leadership group and being a kind of critical friend or kind of advisor in a sort of advisory capacity in that group. As well as participating in the community of practices that they have with their partner schools. And we've talked about, in future, there's probably a need, as obviously there's quite a strong focus on curriculum, particularly in the first year, but there'll be a need to support the leadership to make sure that they're not forgetting about the broader action plan that they've developed, and to kind of keep them on track and provide advice on how to implement the other components of their action plan. So that's where, having a community representative will be really good. And I guess in that role, being able to link them in to what's happening within the broader community around preventing violence against women. And I guess the other area we think that there's probably a nice synergy is supporting them with student engagement and student voice, as that was kind of a big focus of the Girls Talk, Guys Talk program. And, for CoHealth, we're very passionate about co-design. And so in this context, I think it's really important to have the students really engaged and involved in this process. So that's kind of the other area we think that there's probably a nice synergy where we can kind of support Warringah moving forward.
So, Ash, you work in a number of schools in your current role as project lead in and around the Geelong area, but also some schools that are in rural Victoria and quite small towns, including, I think, my old primary school in Apollo Bay.
They're doing great, by the way.
Good. Okay. Yes. Sure, they've improved. Yes, since the 1980s, early 1990s. Does the way you work with these schools, city-based schools and rural schools or small-town schools, differ? And what differences do arise in terms of the work that you do with them around respectful relationships?
Yeah, I think we're in a really unique position in Barwon because we've got 5 local government areas, and I mean, regional Geelong is a very urban, I wouldn't say city, but it is a city of Greater Geelong. And then we have some really rural areas, so Colac Otways, right down to Apollo Bay, and some really small little towns. And I guess for us, it's probably from Queenscliff to maybe Apollo Bay, it's probably a 3.5 hour drive, and probably the same the other in the distance as well. So it is quite big. I guess for us, what we have found is that we've broken up our school areas into 5 clusters, and so it does actually take a little bit of time, because every time we deliver something, we'll deliver it 5 times. But being a teacher, the more that we deliver the same thing, it's actually really a great thing, and I find by the end of that, I'm like, okay, now we're really kicking goals. So I think that we are definitely needing to travel a great distance, and Felicity, my colleague, is sitting in the audience as well and be able to verify that. And we repeat the same thing and really target our areas and go to our areas. I think when we're talking about community engagement, particularly in areas like Colac or maybe areas that have high disadvantage or lack of resources or high family violence, L17 call-outs, we do need to actually go to schools. And I spend so much time in schools going to where people are. And I mean, that's that. I have a youth engagement kind of background and community engagement, and I just sort of, to me, it's about that active outreach. So I'm very rarely in the office and do my emails at night, and I'm just in schools every single day, constantly being able to go to where the need is. And I think that that's the most important thing.
Pauline, you have been a proactive leader in respect for relationships in your school community at Fitzroy High for a number of years. We know, though, that not all school principals are as enthusiastic and supportive as you are around this work. So I'm just wondering, how do you respond to colleagues who feel like respectful relationships is an add-on, a passing fad, or something that you know we've seen before and it's just coloured differently? How do you deal with that?
Boy, easy question. I'd like to say the world has changed, but in some ways the more it changes, the more it stays the same. But fundamentally it is a bit different, but as a female principal, I also notice that I am responded to differently than I see male principals being responded to. So I do know that there are structural things that people do, are kind of like an instinctive response to people in different positions. And I do think that male principals have more voice than females, because you don't want to be seen as the whinging woman kind of idea that people might get. But having said all that, I work in Yarra and Darebin, and you probably know that we have both federal and state Green politicians now, which gives you a bit of an indication of the kind of people that live in those areas. So luckily I do work in an area that is a bit more, if you like, leftist leaning, a bit more socially inclusive, and social principles of social justice and so on. So in my role in my area, I probably don't experience quite so much resistance as you might perhaps in a rural area, but I lived in the country, so I kind of know what it's like in the country, but that was a long time ago. So I really don't know the answer, except that it's a discussion point, and we shouldn't stop talking about it, and we shouldn't stop honouring the voices of women and those kinds of things. And I find in this space working with male teachers is also challenging, and it's challenging for them. And Sharon was presenting some things to my staff, and none of the men spoke. No one did not ask a question, did not make a comment. And I asked them later on, why was that? Because normally they are kind of dominant. And they were really uncomfortable, because a bit like they've got to shoulder the sins of every man in a way. You can tell I was brought up a Catholic. That's where my social justice comes from, actually. Yeah. There's good things about it. Sorry, I digress. So men often have a response is, what about violence against men? What about the male suicide, you know? What are you going to do about that? Well, I don't think they're mutually exclusive things that you can pay attention to. So I think it's just to keep talking, to keep thinking about it, to keep involving everyone in the discussion. And, you know, I'm sure there are women who are not on board as well. It's not just... I'm not sure if that was implied in your question. It came from male principals, but that's the way I took it. But there's no easy answer. It's a long-term project, very, very long-term.
It is. And I'm just wondering what you think was going on, Pauline, for your male staff in terms of their description of feeling uncomfortable. Was it a discomfort that they were prepared to go with, or that they're resisting?
I think what they felt, and the statistics are really frightening. And so I think if they haven't seen those statistics and haven't reflected on it, I think you do have a sense of guilt in why haven't I done anything about this? Do I allow this to happen in my own... Not that I am a perpetrator, but what do I do at the pub? What kind of jokes do I make? What kind of comments do I make? So I think there's a bit of reflection on their own, and we're human beings. We just react in different ways to that sort of stimulus. But talking to them later on, when they'd had time to think about it, I think the response is different. It is more reflective, and it is more, what can I do to help this? And part of my strategy is to invite them onto the leadership team or the implementation. What can they do? And some of them, being fathers and involved in primary schools, do actually join the respectful relationship group at their child's school because they really want the best for their kid. So, and I find that a really powerful lever, because when they come back to their workplace, they bring that with them. So if I can encourage them to actually be on the leadership of either my school or other schools, that's a really valuable insight for them.
It's sort of getting that real buy-in from them, isn't it?
Can I just add, Emma?
Yeah, please.
I think that with resistance, and I think we need to be engaging men, and I think we need to be engaging families, and I think we need to be engaging students. And I think the best way to be actually doing that is by seeing men, male staff, male students, and our families as actual change makers and as major players in this work. And I think if we approach resistance or potential resistance as a way of bringing people on board and empowering, and that being the centre of, like you touched on, there's a guilt of not being involved and not creating that change. So if we're going and we target schools or staff or males or students or families as a point of intervention, I think that we're very quickly putting people offside. But if it's around come on board and empowerment and reflecting back that you are at a position of being major players in this work, we often, in Barwon at least, see a huge difference in that crowd of engagement, whether that's talking to students or to staff or to families. So, yeah, I think if we see schools as a site of intervention, it can be a little bit off-putting.
Schools are workplaces as well as educational institutions. And the whole school approach should engage staff as much as it should engage students, if not more in a sense. How can community organisations support schools and school leadership to bring staff along on the respectful relationships journey, if you like?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I think that is where sometimes that's harder to get the traction, because I think people kind of jump to the curriculum and the students. So it's kind of, well, I think just being there and trying to shift the focus and trying to bring people back to that is a really important starting point. I think, with Warringah, what I've seen is having a really diverse representation of staff on the leadership group has been really good. So they have kind of been through this journey, and you can see that their awareness and their understanding is starting to shift. And even if it is something that they're going to around curriculum for students, they are thinking about how that applies to their own life and comments that they may have made to colleagues previously, or comments they may have made to friends previously. So that's been really great through being in the leadership group to see how, I think just by being part of this process and this journey, their understanding and their awareness is already starting to shift. But yes, I think also it is putting those, working on putting the kind of systematic policies and procedures and plans in place, which I think, with Warringah, we've had some really good ideas in the action planning process of how to do that. And I think there's strong commitment of how to kind of, make sure that isn't just individuals increasing that awareness, but that's kind of systematically integrated into those kind of school structures to allow staff to kind of live that.
It's a cultural change, isn't it? Which is what we're all working towards. I just want to ask you to say a little bit more, Georgia, or Therese actually, really, about the action plan that you have developed with CoHealth. Now, is that an action plan specifically for the implementation of the Respectful Relationships whole school approach, or is it embedded in an annual implementation plan? What sort of approach have you used to that?
Okay, so as a leadership group, in terms of Respectful Relationships, we had a one-day planning day to go through to develop the action plan based on Deep's, what's it called? The wheel of...
Yeah. 6 elements, the whole school approach.
So, actually, I think we had a copy of Barwood's to have a look at. I also have 2 children at schools doing Respectful Relationships in Barwon, so that's always nice to see what they're doing.
Do you talk about that around the dinner table?
Oh, sometimes, but I have a 14-year-old son, and he's doesn't tell me too much. The 10-year-old does. So anyway, we had a whole day, and so we developed an action plan. Georgia was part of that process, and certainly, like when it came to roles and responsibilities, like Georgia was part of that with members from the school team. So that just allowed to actually divvy up a bit, because if you look at that action planning process and that it's whole of school, whole of community, it is quite a big process to do. The other thing in terms of our school is there is an AIP, annual implementation plan, where the school actually sort of prioritises different areas of work. So Respectful Relationships is part of our annual implementation plan. So that also, in terms of a school setting, gives it credibility in terms of that really as a whole school we are reporting back against that. So in terms of a school context, that's actually a really big win in terms of Respectful Relationships. And it just means that, that will set the culture of the school. So when we go to delivering that curriculum, it also means that in terms of staff as well, that will be a key area of work in terms of professional development for staff, but also to supporting staff and supporting teachers in terms of delivering that curriculum. And I think that also is another important part in terms of why it is so important to have partnerships with community agencies, because as we've been informed that, in delivering that curriculum, that there will be disclosures and there will be conversations that students bring up. And it's really important that teachers are supported in terms of those conversations, and it's important for schools too to know that community sector bring a whole level of expertise around working with children, young people and families who experience family violence.
Yeah, and I guess, probably just to add, I think, we're a community organisation working with Warringah, but I think, what became really evident in that action plan is, that they have been really strategic in thinking about the different community organisations in their area and who can do what. And community organisations are obviously very diverse, and we have different skills and expertise and areas that we can bring to this work. And so one community organisation can't do everything. And so I think that was really good that they've been quite targeted in saying, okay, well, we do need this support, we in a legal sense, so we've got these partnerships and we need this support with the curriculum so we can do this. So they've been quite strategic in thinking about which community organisations can support them where in that action planning process too.
Fantastic, because I think sometimes people do develop an idea that maybe if you're doing an initiative like Respectful Relationships, you form a partnership with an organisation, and there might be that, maybe a primary partnership, but actually what you're saying is that there is a need and you can actually tap into other organisations in the area to bring, bring to life and strengthen the various elements of the whole school approach. What we know is that there is a spike or an increase in disclosures of gender-based violence when we do any primary prevention work. Schools are excellent many schools are excellent at doing the protect framework, the mandatory reporting stuff. In terms of responding to disclosures of violence, which could be a disclosure from a student or it could be a disclosure from a member of staff, a colleague, or potentially somebody from a family member in the school community, there's an important role, I think, that community organisations can play in supporting schools to do that response end work. And I'm just wondering, for anyone really on the panel, could you talk a little bit about the ways that the community sector can support schools to do that work safely, right from what the teacher or the person responding to the disclosure might sort of say or do in that moment, and how to upskill them in that area through to pathways and referrals.
I think that in the moment responding to a disclosure is somewhere where schools can really need support. I think we know mandatory reporting, we know our protect, and people know what to do from the point that when it becomes a mandatory report, but in the moment about that first response can sometimes be really difficult, especially because I think often in schools it's your admin staff, it's your ES staff, it's the staff that maybe aren't coming to events like this today. And so I think we need to be really creative about making sure that our fantastic training that DVRC have put together for our Respectful Relationships teams, that we're actually targeting whole staff or targeting admin and first responders to support them in that response. We need to work together with our community organisations to put wraparound support around our students, around our families. And I think that it needs to be that we really need to be going into schools going, it's more than just a notification of child protection. Child protection are fantastic and do a great job when they need to, but I think we need to be educating our schools that it's that specialist family violence sector, it's our family services, it's Child First, it's our youth services, and really that wraparound thing. And I think it's that disconnect between what we see as a mandatory report from the school and what child protection are able to respond to.
Do you sort of see, Pauline, that there's a key role for the community sector to work with schools to upskill schools to be able to hold students who might disclose or staff who might disclose? Or do you feel it's more of a higher up structural systemic type change that we need?
It's probably both of those things, but what it triggers, my response is there is so much gender-based violence that we don't even know the half of it, a quarter of it, a tenth of it. And so because we don't know and because we haven't experienced these disclosures so regularly, I don't think structurally the government, the state, whoever, hospitals don't have the capacity to respond to the need at the moment. And I think we need to place pressure upon politicians or whoever it is to actually put those the resources in place, because what's the point otherwise?
Yeah, and that does highlight the need to really think through the response end before actually beginning the primary prevention work, sort of at the other end of the spectrum. Therese, you work at Warringah Park School, which, as I understand it, is for children and young people between 5 and 18 years of age who have a diagnosed intellectual disability. In terms of some of the stuff that Ash has just been talking about with disclosures and working supportively with those children and young people, what are some of the, the ways in which you might need the community sector to support the school to work with children and young people around disclosures and supporting them if indeed they do disclose or you suspect there might be family violence?
I was sitting there just sort of reflecting, thinking about some of the practical ways, and we do work with a number of community organisations. I think having opportunities to do secondary consultation, if possible. I was thinking a model around that which we would use, which we do with RCH around mental health concerns. That would be an excellent model. Also, I was thinking within our school we do a lot of safety plans with students, so I was thinking to have the opportunity where there are issues of possible risk around family violence, and certainly we do have students with that. like to be able to sort of like share or come up with like a documentation that could be a standard format would be good. And look, I don't know, I was just sort of thinking like we've just done a refugee project over 2 years at our school, and we've worked with Drummond Street, and the outcomes from that has just been amazing in terms of parent engagement. But one of the outcomes for us as a school that we have said is that every young person or student that is from a refugee background will now have someone from wellbeing sit on their student support group, because that also means too that, you know, where there's opportunity, and an outcome from that project has actually been doing referrals for both young people and families to community sector. And just having the parents yesterday talk about the changes for their family is amazing. That group of parents actually want to continue to meet. So for me too, to have some secondary consultation, especially with community agencies working with different cultural backgrounds, would be excellent, because there are some real concerns in terms of some of our young people. An example where they think it's just normal, that's my family, it's, you know, we're meant to get a belting, and I'm talking young women. So to have some opportunities to work with community agencies around some of that work would be really helpful in terms of some of our students and young people. That's sort of some practical examples.
Sort of bringing that in intersectional lens, I guess, and the community sector being quite good at being able to bring that to schools.
I just wanted to add to the referral pathways discussion. So in the Barwon area, our liaison officer, so at the moment Felicity, and then Kate Robinson, who was previously in that role. So our liaison role has set up 2 reference groups, one in Geelong and one in the Colac Upways area, looking at referral pathways and response with schools. So we've got some key people from schools on those committees, as well as child protection, while they're on co-op, someone from VicPol, so Child First, ourselves, and a couple others that I'm sorry I can't think quite clearly. But really looking at the response sector and the service sector around how we support schools, but also on the other hand, we're doing some work with all of our key contact people at each of our schools as well, particularly our lead schools, to then support through communities of practice with our partner schools, but actually looking at our internal referrals as well as our external referrals from a school perspective. So it's sort of both need to be happening at the same time. So sometimes schools have very clear referral pathways to wellbeing, to as well as to external organisations, but sometimes it's very ad hoc, particularly in some of our very, very small schools. We've got schools that have 3 staff, and it's whoever's there on the day, which is fine if that's where schools are at, but we still need to have some kind of clear flowchart of what that looks like, of who it is that's free on the day. So we're sort of doing some work internally with schools around that, as well as with our service system as well. So yeah, I think that there's some work to do around referral pathways and supporting schools with that.
Thanks, Ash. Yeah, go for it.
I'll just add to that as well. One of the things I've been interested in is actually supporting teachers who are probably at the front line, and the stress and distress it causes them in some cases. And I've had in the past a coach and a person who actually was on leave from another school in a wellbeing area to come in and work through those issues with the teachers, because sometimes they don't actually, one, there is the distress that it causes, but also, has their response been appropriate? Did they say, act in the right way, or was there something else they should have done? All those sorts of things. So I think it's important not to forget the people who are doing on-the-ground work. So if there are community organisations who offer that support to teachers, I would be very happy to take your number. Thank you.
That's a really important area, graduate teachers, and I think you're right. Like, they really do have the day-to-day relationship with the students. So often, you know, they will be the people that the students will talk to.
Mm-hmm. And teaching is, by its very nature, an extremely stressful job, and so add in a potential disclosure that you're not quite ready for, and it certainly can lead to distress. Yeah. Tapping into what is your area of expertise, Georgia, which is the primary prevention end of things. Are you able to, without wanting to put you on the spot too much, I'm just wondering if you're able to think of some concrete examples or specific examples of ways that the community sector can support schools in doing primary prevention work, or if you'd like to think about it in terms of the elements of the whole school approach.
Yes, and this is not exhaustive. As I said, I think there are lots of opportunities for community sector. I think we've just talked about, there's opportunities in the response end. I think there's also, I guess, opportunities where co-health's come from is we think our expertise is more in, gender, and particularly in supporting some of that, supporting staff and students to get around the concepts of gender, particularly those kind of two topics for our resource, and thinking through that and how to kind of, get your head around those concepts, which you really do need to do before you kind of teach it.
Gender lens.
Gender lens, yeah. So, and then I think, so there's that, and then applying that gender lens really across the whole school framework in terms of, policies and procedures and practices. I think, for us also, we bring quite strong project management expertise, which is not something that schools, I think, have a lot of time to do, which we do have a bit of time to do in the community sector. And as Terry said, some of that has been quite useful for them in terms of bringing some, skills in kind of needs assessments and planning and monitoring and evaluation. So that might be something that is expertise that sits within your community organisation that might be useful. I think I already said, linking with different community organisations in the area. One thing that we did through Girls Talk Guys Talk is also linked to some of the council youth services, which worked quite well in terms of bringing council youth workers into schools and supporting youth engagement in the curriculum. So I think that bringing those connections, linking in with the broader work that's happening in the community around prevention of violence. In most regions, there's a primary prevention partnership, often kind of led or driven by a women's health organisation in the area. A lot of community organisations and councils are members of those partnerships. So it's really worth, I think, if you're a school, figuring out who that partnership is and approaching them as a starting point to see what else is happening. I know in our region we've done a lot of work around supporting organisations, not necessarily schools, but supporting organisations who are members with gender equity. So a lot of that's going to be really useful for schools to think through, schools as workplaces and looking at your own policies and procedures. And we're now also doing more work at, engaging community and particularly, culturally and linguistically diverse communities. So there's a lot of other work happening with organisations and with communities as part of those partnerships where those kind of lessons and experience might be really useful for schools. There's probably a lot more things that organisations
they're very
can do.
Useful examples, though, for people to be thinking about and considering, and hopefully talking with each other about as well.
Yeah, and I was going to also add, I think there are community organisations who are really good, who have quite well developed curriculum resources, who are also very good at supporting schools in, really thinking through the curriculum, and if they haven't developed it or they want to adapt their curriculum, how to do that. I know at our previous community of practice we had Victorian Legal Aid, and I know Family Planning does really good work in that area too. So it really just depends, I think, on, tapping into who the community organisations are in your region and what they can, and are able to offer.
Just very briefly, Ash, would you say that a good first port of call for somebody working in a community organisation could be, at this point, the project lead or liaison officer in the area in which that...
Absolutely.
Yes? Because you, I imagine, would have an understanding of what the organisations are, what sorts of capacity they might have to work with schools, and, importantly, which schools need what. So it is part of the role of the liaison officer to make those connections.
Absolutely. So the project lead role is more sitting with schools around supporting the whole school approach, and the liaison role really is around bringing together the community sector and statutory bodies to support schools as well. And that linkage, in the Barwon area, we work very collaboratively around those two roles, and and we both have experience in schools and in the community sector, so we do that sort of together. But yeah, I think I would absolutely encourage people not in, or if you are from my area and I don't already know you, contact me as well. But if you don't know your project lead and liaison officers in your own areas, there is actually 34 staff from Department of Ed in each, apart from people that are currently on leave, but across the state that are tapped into more than 1,000 schools and have very strong relationships with schools and ongoing meetings and email lists. And so it is a really good way. And I guess just in terms of some examples, I think it's about building the capacity of teachers. I know that we now, it's definitely not seen as best practice that we bring people in to deliver, and we need to be building the skills of our teachers to be able to deliver the 4 hours, because at the end of the day, they're the teachers that will be responding to disclosures. We would love it that students would just respond or disclose at a particular time when wellbeing were available, but it doesn't happen. So we need to make sure that our teachers are skilled up, and we've been running some regular foundation knowledge PDs in Barwon, specifically around topics 7 and 8. So we've had the introduction. We do as the RR team around topics 7 and 8, the statistics, why that's important, where it fits into the curriculum. And then from there, Vic Legal Aid, who have also been down in Western, talking about consent and the law and sexting, and then CARSA doing some work around sexual assault prevention, as well as our gender and sexuality support project, GASP, which City of Greater Geelong, most city local councils have a youth services project working with young people who are same-sex attracted, trans or gender diverse. So we've been running those foundation knowledge PDs on a regular basis, targeting teachers from level that are delivering level 5 and 6 up from topic 7 and 8, in addition to our 4R teaching, which we've been doing as well, which is really around the delivery in the classroom, which I really recommend that community organisations get on board with our RR team and support that as well. But I think there does need to be some more foundational knowledge that is delivered, and I think that that's where people in the room can really support schools with coming on board and us co-delivering some of that stuff, or us bringing schools forward to, I guess the thing is that we have schools that have money, and one of the biggest, there was a question around key ingredients for successful partnerships, and I think it's about understanding just how time poor schools are, and that's been a regular thing today, but also the cost of CRTs and things is incredible. So if you come on board with us, then we're able to then recommend our schools use their grants that they've received from being part of Respectful Relationships, and then we can really target, instead of some organisations individually targeting schools where you might need to go to sort of 12, 15 schools, most of our RR teams have regular PD sessions, and if we work together on that, I think we could probably reach more schools and staff and more targeted. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Look, I do want to open it up for audience Q&A, but I just have to ask you, Pauline, about a little question first about the student-led Feminist Collective that operates out of headquarters at Fitzroy High School. Has that collective had any sort of direct involvement in the Fitzroy's High's role as a lead school in the current initiative? Of course they're involved because they're there and there, but what in terms of student voice, I guess?
The FemCo started, I don't know if anyone knows the history or wants to know the history, but it started from a book group. I said before that students have capacity to learn what they want to learn, so they wanted to have a book club, which they had, and they were looking at Of Mice and Men, I think the book was, one female character who gets murdered and she's nameless. And so they started talking about this, why, what did that mean and all those sorts of things. And it was a lunchtime, they said, well, can we meet at lunchtime and just talk about this, which they did. And they said, well, basically that sucks. What can we do about it? Can we have a class on this? So they came to me and they said, this is how it'll operate, we've got a teacher, la la la. And so we did, we put it in as a class, and they wanted it called the Feminist Collective. And there are boys in this too, by the way, it's not just girls in it. And it's year 8 to year 10. You can think of them as electives, but they're vertical. So they met and they said, well, excuse me, it's okay, having a whinge about this stuff, but we really should do something. So then they started working with a graphic designer to make some posters, and they chose objectification of young women's bodies and the use of the word slut in social media to denigrate young women. And I don't know if people have seen the posters, but if you go on the website and Google FHS Femco, they made beautiful posters, and one is an image of a young woman who was a student at the time with a hand slap to the side of her face and a bit of red slut. And so they developed that and the objectification posters. And then they said, well, that's not enough. Now what are we going to do? We've got some posters, but that's not going to change the world. And that's what we want to do. So they said, well, let's write curriculum materials. So they had a Kickstarter campaign. We targeted $3,000 and got 12. Which actually allowed the teacher then to work. We went on a writing camp. I co-taught this with the teacher at the time. And so we took the students away on a writing camp with a writer, and we talked about what did they want in the curriculum, what sort of things did they think it was important. And then I did some work with them around, well, this is how teachers plan lessons. Well, that didn't go down very well. And they actually weren't interested in that part of the thing.
Boring.
No, that was the boring bit. And I said, you've got to have, what do you want to learn? You've got to have your objectives, and then you have your learning activities, and then you have some kind of... And they go, oh, no, we don't want to do that stuff. So part of what the Kickstarter money enabled us to do was to allow Bryony, the teacher, to work... she actually worked with the Victorian Women's Trust in a space to write the materials that the students had said they wanted. Then they test drove that. Then we had the opportunity... This is a very long story. Should I stop?
I think it's really interesting. And, it's possible that there are some people from the community sector sitting there going, there might be a school in my area that might want to do something like this, and maybe I can help them.
So then at that stage, Deb Ollis from Deakin Uni was writing their Stepping Out materials, the kind of first edition, if you like, of Respectful Relationships. And we had a VCAL program, and I can't quite remember the connection. How do we connect with Deb? But we did. And she said, oh, look, we got these materials. Can we get a group of students to have a look at them? So our VCAL students looked at those materials, and then they decided what they would do, because they have to do a personal project as part of their outcomes. They would teach those materials to the Femco, and then the Femco would feed back about what the materials were like. Does that all make sense? So it was all run by the kids. And so Deb and Leanne came and they did the evaluation of that, and the older students taught the Femco students the materials, and that got some fabulous feedback. And what was really interesting was what were the things they wanted to learn about, and they wanted to learn about consent. And when I talked to them about that, because you think they know everything, well, they don't. They actually did not know what the legal elements of consent and all that was. So that was really interesting. But they also wanted to know about relationships. How do you end a relationship properly? How do you actually do that? Now, that wasn't in the curriculum, but that's what they were interested in, around things like social media and so on. The Femco now, it's probably its 5th year, I think. It's now up to, because it published those materials and so on and had that interest in the initial Stepping Out materials, are now looking at holding conferences to bring in students from other schools who are interested, and we've already met with local schools around issues there. We also have a Pride group who work with Femco on various issues, and they hold common celebrations and all of that sort of thing. And I've probably forgotten the question now.
No, I think
what
you've
role
answered
did they
it.
have to play? Well, they were kind of instrumental in one way, setting the scene, but again, that the capacity for students to tell you about what they want to learn, how they want to learn it, what's important to them, is really, really important to create that environment that I referred to before. It's part of how do you have a humane learning environment. Well, you take them with you, and you listen to them.
They're the experts, after all. Yeah.
They are.
Well, basically adults are really boring when they stand up in front of kids. Like, seriously, you can be really boring. Not you.
Are there any overall kind of averaged out differences you've experienced so far about the difference, particularly with parent engagement, staff engagement, student engagement, with primary schools and secondary schools?
I think that it's actually easier to engage families in a primary setting, and it's also extremely important. Our families make up school council, make up the large community hub of the school. So I think that family engagement is really important. So a lot of schools in Barwon, we've been making sure that we have family reps on our Respect for Relationships teams. We've been having a number of family engagement sessions. We have been having open classrooms, days where families are welcome to come on board, because I think teachers go, oh, no, this isn't going to go down with our families, this is going to be really difficult. And then when we're able to say, just give it a go, or talk to your students, talk to your families, on the whole, when they understand what it is and understand what it's not, then families have been really engaged. So we've had a couple of schools, in particular, the Our Lady Star of the Sea Catholic Primary School in Ocean Grove, that have done some really fantastic respect walks, where they've involved families in sending home some information around respect for relationships and some pledges as a family that they could make around respect for relationships and the family unit. And then bringing on community organisations, the fire brigade, police, all sorts of things, and then actually coming and doing a walk and all sort of signing a pledge and putting their ribbon on a particular pole around the community. They did a big walk around Ocean Grove. And so a lot of schools have sort of done some really quite big events, as well as some info sessions, and also like some sort of tea and talk days and things like that. I've talked to a lot of school council groups, parish priests, you name it. Yeah, I'm really keen to make sure that families know what we're doing and what we're supporting schools to do, and being able to support schools to answer those tricky questions. And so, yeah, definitely school council meetings and things like that. And the engagement in primary schools, they have a very strong social emotional learning already. A lot of our schools are already Kids Matter schools or school-aid PBS schools or Berry Street. So sometimes the respect for relationship stuff I find is actually easier in a primary setting, as long as we can really walk them through that topic 7 and 8 and what that means and what that looks like on the ground. Therese, do you want to?
Look, I think in a school setting it is really important to build on what's already there, and see, we certainly have at our school in terms of a positive behaviours school, some of the other things we do, zones of regulation. And in terms of parent engagement, so in terms of respect for relationships, so we've had our orientation for our new parents coming in, so certainly we talked about respect for relationships around that. Also in terms of, it is looking at what you do already, so I think thinking like over the last few years at our school, we usually hold key events for like Mother's Day and Father's Day, and we now have way more dads come on our Father's Day pie night. And so even last year, just to sort of start, I just sort of took the iPad around and started asking, with their father, son or significant male, what does your relationship mean? So just starting to use some of the language about that. So, we'll look to build on that. Just the other thing too that I would mention that we've done, this is in our higher levels, is we do a program called the Jigsaw Program. So part of that is that every week you do a catch up with the students, where it does provide an opportunity for every single student in the class to rate how their week has been, and it really is quite amazing that as the year goes on what students will share with you. And so as part of the Respect for Relationships too, we had a lawyer who is located at the Grange, who does work in schools, come in and talk about family violence. And after that, so that's a year 8, 9, all of those students said they actually wanted to know more about it. They had never heard about White Ribbon Day. They all said, so at the end of it we said, look, do you want to learn more about it? Do you want to do something about this? And every student said, yes, we want to learn more, we want to do more about that. And this is just a starting process, so they've been developing key messages. And last week, so we offered if they wanted to join the Grange Community Centre to actually join in the community walk. And we had 8 students attend that. I think they were the only school group that attended. So even that in terms of a partnership with community, where they were walking with that community agency, they shared the bus back with them. And really, if I had asked those students 3 months ago if they knew what White Ribbon was about, they would not have known about it. And sometimes too, as a school, we can be scared to have the conversations with young people. And, you know, out of those young people that went on that walk, there are that are affected by family violence. But it is about, you know, that long term. I think it was someone from DEET that said, you know, this is like a 20-year initiative. Like it's, you know, that change is going to take time. But, yeah, I totally agree, starting with the students and not being afraid to have the conversations with them, because I think we actually probably learn more from them than what they do from us.
Join me in thanking the panel.